I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. While it's been a while since I've covered the Titan submersible, I'm pleased to be back revisiting this material via an excellent, such an eloquently written article in Vanity Fair that has revisited the Titan tragedy with a fresh pair of eyes. And there's such an excellent line from that article: the abyss doesn't care if you went to Princeton or that your ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. Just so. Before we get to the rest of the article, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So in this analysis, I'm only going to review about 1/5 of the article. It's really comprehensive. It's a long form article, but it really does touch on some really important aspects. So quoting from the article, it says, it doesn't care about if you went to Princeton or if your ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. If you want to go down into her world, the world of the abyss, she sets the rules. And her rules are strict, befitting the gravitas of the realm. To descend into the ocean's abysmal zone, that's the waters between 10,000 to 20,000 feet, it's a serious affair. And because of the annihilating pressures, far more challenging than rocketing into space. So eloquently written, very well expressed. It's such an astute point. It's a little like a court of law in true crime. You need to leave your personality at the door and be respectful of processes and social tides that are bigger than the individual ego. It's also an echo of what we said earlier about Stockton Rush coming from an aeronautical engineering background and thinking it applied to the deep sea. Also thinking that he was a big fish, even in the pond of, thinking of the sea as a pond. And, this whole business of taking carbon fiber from Boeing shows that is exactly what he thought, that he could apply aeronautical engineering to the deep sea. Anyway, back to the article, quote, "The subs that dive into this realm, there aren't many, are tested and tested and tested. Every component is checked for flaws in a pressure chamber and checked again and again, and every step of this process is certified by an independent marine classification society. This assurance of safety is known as classing a sub. Deep-sea submersibles are constructed of the strongest and most predictable materials as determined by the laws of physics." Now, I think what hasn't been fully appreciated in this case is the magical thinking one sees in marketing and venture capital, some areas of venture capital anyway, and then how Stockton applied it to engineering. Let me say that again. What I don't think has been fully thought about is how the magical thinking that one often sees in promotion and marketing, how Stockton seemed to apply that to engineering. Just because I want something to work means it does. Well, yes, until it doesn't. Going back to the article, in the abyss, that means passengers typically sit inside a titanium or steel pressure hull. So what's being described here is the classical engineering for the deep ocean. It's a titanium sphere, basically, right? A circle, a globe. And so it's either titanium or steel, and that is the only shape that distributes pressure symmetrically. The article goes on to note that means adding crush-resistant syntactic foam around the sphere for buoyancy and protection to offset the weight of the titanium. That means redundancy upon redundancy with no single point of failure. It means a safety plan, a rescue plan, and acute situational awareness at all times. And then she also says it means respect for the forces of the deep ocean, which Stockton Rush didn't have. And I really appreciate how she's kind of calling him out in a factual way, in a unemotional, unsensational way, simply just saying, he didn't have the right respect for what is required here. And it's absolutely right. I think Stockton was trying to show he was a maverick, and that somehow by taking risks, as mountain climbers do, that meant he was brave, that meant he was heroic, that meant he was a visionary. But I think the reality is he was toying with a gun, essentially. Whatever he thought he was doing, he was basically like a child playing with a gun, a toddler playing with a gun, playing Russian roulette with pressure. I think, and in terms of this parable from Vanity Fair, it's also clear that Stockton Rush, certainly from my perspective, was a kind of spoilt man boy that didn't like to be told no, not even by Mother Nature. And if you look at the record, the fact that there'd not been any incidents for something like 50 years, not a single life lost, and then in one instance, 5 lives lost. Something's wrong there. Anyway, going back to the article, quote, in December 2015, 2 years before the Titan was built, Rush had lowered a 1/3 scale model of his 4,000 meter sub to B into a pressure chamber and watched it implode at 4,000 psi, a pressure equivalent to only 2,740 meters. Now, what's so interesting about this is it's not that Rush didn't know anything about the limits of the material he was using. It wasn't as though Rush completely avoided the whole safety process, right? He took his sub through this, and then he proceeded regardless. Now, what is that if not pride and ego? The article goes on to note that the test's stated goal was to validate that the pressure vessel is capable of withstanding an external pressure of 6,000 psi, right, which basically corresponds to Titanic's depth. And so the writer notes in the article that Stockton might have changed course at this moment, because hasn't it been proved now in this kind of environment? And she goes on to say he could have stood back at that point, stood back for a moment and reconsidered, but he didn't. Instead, OceanGate issued a press release stating that the test had been a resounding success because it demonstrates that the benefits of carbon fiber are real. Now, that's kind of a face-palm moment. Instead of issuing a press release saying, sorry, this is the situation, in other words, telling the truth, he turns it into a promotional opportunity. And he distorts the reality of the situation. Now, of course, the truth of his craft's actual failure, the reality of it, ultimately manifested like madness.
See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
Now, I think it's not accidental, it's not a coincidence, I think that's the better word, that Stockton Rush came from such a famous family. And I think that kind of put pressure on him to show that he was better than everyone else, that he did know better than everyone else, that he was, in a sense, a master of the universe, just like Elon Musk and other innovators. Anyway, I'm going to quote one last paragraph from the article. In a culture that has adopted the ridiculous mantra, move fast and break things, that type of arrogance can get a person far. But in the deep ocean, the price of admission is humility, and it's non-negotiable. Well put, so very eloquently put together this. And that is the story in a nutshell. The opposite of humility is hubris. Maybe hubris belongs in space. Maybe it belongs in the Himalaya. Maybe it belongs in the cockpit of jet pilots. But there's no place for it in the abyss. There one's got to be conservative and careful and cautious, and one needs to have tested everything. One needs to rely on the efforts of others who've tried things and tested things. There needs to be a collective approach, not individualism. I'm not going to take it further than that, except to say that I'm still working on a comparison between the Titan tragedy and the Rust incident. And so if you're interested in either of those, look out for that in the next couple of days. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.